Good evening. Welcome to Scotland at 7, Monday's edition with me, Gordon Ross. Joining me in the studio this evening, we have Sandra White, MSP. Good evening to you, Sandra. How are you this evening?
Gordon, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, we'll be joining Sandra later on in the programme. Also joining us this evening is Valentina Servera Clevell, who is a native of Barcelona, I gather. Valentina? Oh, we've lost Valentina. We'll come back to Valentina later on in the programme. First of all, the coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,629,270 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the beginning of the pandemic. Of these, 1,436,895 were confirmed negative. 192,375 have tested positive. There are 559 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. This will, of course, be an underestimate of the number of cases, because not everyone with the virus will display the symptoms and not all those with the symptoms will be tested. There were no new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 6,715. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,428 were in hospital last night, 102 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 1,255,190 people have now received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 14,501 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 117,396 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 230 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now, if you'd like to join in the conversation here this evening, you can do so, of course, on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. And now to tonight's main headlines. Scotland has met the over 70s vaccine target. At today's COVID briefing, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, announced that Scotland had reached its mid-February vaccination target, offering the first vaccine dose to all over 70 and extremely clinically vulnerable Scots by February the 15th. The figures published today only go up to February the 14th. However, the First Minister said that she is satisfied that the goal has been reached. The First Minister told the briefing, "Today is the final date of the period during which we said we would offer the vaccine to everyone over 70 and everyone with an extreme clinical vulnerability. We will report today's numbers tomorrow, but we are satisfied that we have met that target." Let me come to you first, Sandra, since I understand that you've actually had your vaccination just recently, so I gather this is good news all round for many of us.
Just a couple of hours ago, actually, I got my virus to my JAG at the Louisa Jordan. Very, very good, very efficient, checked who you were, etc., etc. It wasn't painful at all to get the JAG. They talked me through it. My arm's maybe a wee bit sore now, but that's to be expected of any JAG. But yep, delighted that I was able to go down and get the JAG. And I must admit, it was a very smooth process. It wasn't queued out. There was plenty of rooms there for people, plenty of vaccinators. I was very impressed by the whole thing, I must admit. So, yep, that's me. Got the first one, and then just wait for the second one.
Well, I can also verify that they've got through the over 70s, because I received my invitation for vaccination as well just today. So they must be working on all of us who are under the age of 70 now. I'm due for mine, I think, on the 2nd of March. So it's definitely moving on apace. How important do you think it is, Sandra, though, that this target has been met? Would it have been a really difficult thing to have to announce that we hadn't met this target?
I don't think it would have been a difficult thing politically wise. Obviously, the opposition, the media would have attacked Nicola and the SNP government if it hadn't been met. But I think when you look at the speed they've got through, the care homes, care assistants, people like that who are in the front line, I think that was a feat in itself. And to get to this particular stage also is another feat. And I think it's just something that we should be celebrating the fact that we've got there. And even if it had been slightly less, I don't think it would be anything to worry about. Sometimes we pick up too much from the opposition and from the media. As long as it's been done correctly, people are happy with it, people are turning up. That's the most important thing, I think. But it was great to basically see we had reached that number. But targets, sometimes they're about targets in that respect.
Certainly over a million vaccinations in such a short period of time. And with Scotland has an adult population of somewhere in the region of 3 or 4 million people. So to be, 25% of the way there is definitely good news. If I could come to Valentina, we seem to have got you back online, Valentina. Welcome back again.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
The connection here is terrible.
Well, sometimes you lose connections, but you're back now, and I'm not sure how are things going in Catalonia with regards to vaccination. Do you have the same kind of program we have here in Scotland?
Well, vaccinations here came later on. They didn't start until January, first weeks of January, and then we had a lot of daft mistakes from people where they were breaking the process of keeping the vaccination. So the first doses, a lot of them were lost, which is a big sign of incompetence, and we're not in a situation to be wasting vaccines like that. We're moving now forward, but we still haven't reached, I think, the level of Scotland yet. We're quite far away still.
Have there been difficulties getting a hold of the vaccines as well, Valentina?
Yes, it's been quite difficult. They've been trying to prioritize care people, like people in the care homes or vulnerable people, but like in Spain, everything is corrupt. Even the COVID vaccinations. If we've seen members of parliament, mayors of towns, and I don't think so. I'm not aware, because remember that yesterday we had elections that we will
Yeah.
talk later on, but these elections happened because Kim Torra was banned from office. So all this time we'd had a presidency in functions, like it wasn't, we had Pere Aragonés like making us president, but he wasn't the elected president. So we've been kind of in a limbo until the elections passed, and then I think parties were using the vaccinations as a political argument during the election. So there's no been targets set officially because we were still waiting to have a new government in place.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm going to move on a little bit from the vaccination programme and talk about quarantine now. And new quarantine rules are actually due to start today. Today saw new rules which require anyone arriving in Scotland from abroad to quarantine in a designated hotel for 10 days and come into force. The issue of travellers arriving in England and then travelling onwards to Scotland remains contentious, as the UK government has only introduced quarantine restrictions on travellers coming from their red list countries. Questioned by journalists, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said that she reserves the option to close the border between Scotland and England. However, she would prefer to see all 4 UK nations adopt Scotland's tougher approach. Public health experts have said that enforcing quarantine on all overseas arrivals to the UK would be a more effective way in preventing any new corona variants from breaking out and spreading within the community. Sandra, let me come to you first on this. Now, there has been a lot of argument about whether Nicola Sturgeon should close the border. We hear many people, particularly on social media, saying that she should close the border. What's your opinion of this particular issue? Should Nicola close the border, or should she try to negotiate with the UK government and get a cross-UK agreement on this?
I think the borders should be closed, and I sincerely believe that the travel should have been stopped many months ago. And I'm sure when the inquiry comes out about COVID, you'll see that'll be one of the things that's raised in that particular issue. Just to set the scene, I'm on the health committee, and all of these issues, they're called SSIs, which come from the Westminster government, the Scottish government, and because it's a health issue, COVID-19, these SSIs come before our committee, and we question the minister. And actually, we had this SSI just last week on the health committee, and we asked about quarantine to Michael Matheson, who was giving evidence on the SSIs. And the huge problem that we have, and I'm sure you know yourself about this, is the fact that we can stop and make people quarantine when they come off a flight to the three main airports of Aberdeen, Glasgow and Edinburgh. So therefore we can quarantine, and we are doing that as starting from today. The big problem arises when most people arrive into Heathrow down south,
Yeah.
and then come up to Scotland through train, bus, car, whatever it may be. Now,
Mm-hmm.
these people are trace, have got to fill in the travel form. So when they arrive, they know that they're traveling. When they arrive at the airports, Heathrow, they know they're going to be travelling on to Scotland. And they may even go on internal flights, mixing with other passengers. So we have asked, the Scottish Government have asked Westminster if they would have these people quarantine where they land. So if they landed in Heathrow, they would need to quarantine there. And this is where the crux and the problems arise. The UK government so far have refused to do that. But I noticed just a couple of hours ago, they said that basically they would like, no, they didn't say they would have a conversation with us. We are doing our bit to stop the travelling on of anyone who's infected.
Okay, I'm sorry, Sandra, I was going to say to you there, is it fair that to characterise this problem perhaps in two different ways? First of all, the United Kingdom is not quarantining everyone coming from abroad. They're only quarantining those coming from their so-called red zones. In Scotland,
Yeah.
we would want to quarantine everyone, but we would prefer it if people coming into the UK through Heathrow quarantine there. Would that be a sort of fair assessment?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that's where the problem lies. So far, they have not agreed to do that. And as far as I know, there's been no conversation between the Scottish Government in regards to this situation. And Matt Hancock, although he has said he'd be open to conversation, but that's only when he was asked about it.
What about, Sandra, what about people who are potentially infected coming in as well? Because, I mean, what happens if somebody comes in who's infected, maybe not showing the symptoms too early on? I mean, how do we screen against that?
Well, if you're going on a plane from the country you're going from, you're supposed to get tested and be able to prove that you do not have the virus before you can actually go on that plane. That's a process. And then when you're in the quarantine hotels, if it works that way, come to Scotland, you for the 10 days you're there, you'll be tested
Yeah, so you
with
have
a
to take another test in quarantine later on in the quarantine. Is that right, Sandra?
when you're in. If you're in the quarantine hotels as it's working
Yeah,
in Scotland at the moment, you'll be tested twice. The second day you're there, and the eighth day before you leave in the second. But
right.
you should be tested. Most airlines will not take you from another country until you can prove you've had that test in that.
Yeah. Okay, Sandra, thank you for that. Valentina, I don't know how things are in Spain with regards to quarantine. Do you have similar rules in Spain about people coming into the country by airplane?
Well, yes, we do. For example, when I was coming back early in December, I had to pay £159 to get a PCR test at the exact time with the exact details that the Spanish government wanted me when I was entering. So they require you a negative PCR test before entering the country, and then obviously the 14 days quarantine after that. When you're entering Spain, you're required to fill up a form, put in the address and the contact details and where you're going to be quarantining, and the purpose of your flight. But with the hotel situation in Scotland, I agree with closing the border because I believe now that it has been put in place, you should go full on. But I'm just a bit. I don't agree with having put this quarantine, or at least in the hotels, or at least if it had been put in the hotels, I think the government should have been paying for it because, for example, for me and my partner is Scottish, and now he's unable to return back home because we can't afford £1,700 for 10 days. That's something I don't even make that in a month. I'm a student, so we're now unable to return home because we can't afford this quarantine in the hotels. So I don't know if they're going to be looking at ways where people who are unable to pay can have a reduced price, or if the government will be financing it. But yes, I do agree that the border should be closed now that this rules has been put in place.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much, Valentina. Sandra, just another question just sprang to mind there. We're talking about the hotel enforced quarantine. In Scotland, has the Scottish Government thought at all about helping people who can't afford to quarantine in a hotel at their own expense?
They said they would be looking at it. I'm glad that Valentina brought that up because it is a really important point. I mean, it's not just people returning from holiday. It's like Valentina says, coming back, and you've got students who are obviously being encouraged to come back to start their courses if they can. So yeah, it's something that has been raised with the Scottish Government, and they have mentioned the fact that they will look at that. I don't know exactly how they'll work it, but it's a very valid point because it works out at what, £175 a night, I think it is, in a hotel. It's a lot of money.
It certainly is.
Yeah, I don't even spend that on my normal holidays. So it's just such a high quantity. When I saw it, I was like, I can't believe, I couldn't believe it.
It certainly is very steep. It makes you wonder what hotels have been chosen for these quarantines and who has decided which hotels. Was it Dominic Cummings' friends or something like that who own the hotel? Anyway, listen, I've got to move on, and we're coming to a subject close to your heart, Valentina, and that is the Catalonia pro-independence parties have increased their majority. The pro-independence parties won enough seats on Sunday in Catalonia's regional parliament to strengthen their majority, although a strong showing for the local branch of Spain's ruling socialist make it becoming the largest party. With over 99% of the ballots counted, pro-independence parties won 50.9% of the vote, surpassing the 50% threshold for the first time, most likely resulting in the two main independence parties extending their coalition government. The 53% turnout amid the pandemic was down from 79% in the previous election in 2017. Election monitors swapped face masks for full-body protective suits during the final hour of voting, the zombie hour, which was reserved for people with confirmed or suspected COVID-19. Other precautions during the day included temperatures taken on arrival, hand gel and separate entries and exits. The leftist Esquerra Republicana de Catalunya, or ESC, said that it would lead the regional government and seek support of other parties for a referendum on independence. The country starts a new era with pro-independence parties surpassing 50% of the vote for the first time. We have an immense strength to achieve a referendum and a Catalan republic, said the acting regional chief, Pere Aragonès, who led the party's slate of candidates. The fragmented vote, which saw the Socialists win the highest percentage of votes, 23%, and the same number of seats as ERC, 33, in the 135-seat assembly, means that they will also try to form a government. But that would require an unlikely alliance, however, with other parties. The centre-right pro-independence Junts won an estimated 32 seats, while far-left party, the CUP, got 9. Both those parties are considered key to achieving another pro-independence coalition government. The Spanish far-right Vox party won 11 seats in Catalonia's parliament for the first time, ahead of the People's Party, the main Spanish Conservative Party, and the centre-left Ciudadanos. Vox is already the third largest party in Spain's national parliament. Now, Valentina, this sounds like quite a complicated series of parties involved in the Catalan elections recently. How does this work out? We're seeing two parties both claiming that they're going to form governments. Which one is the most likely to succeed?
Well, in yesterday's result, we saw Salvador Illa, who is the former health minister and who is the leader of the Catalan Labour, but they have nothing of left So they're just kind of like a center party. This is the government that, well, this is the candidate that was running for president, and the numbers didn't come out in the end. Now he's claiming he wants to run to be president, but he doesn't have the numbers. He doesn't have the support. He's wanting to do an alliance with Esquerra, but his party is the party that supported closing down the Catalan parliament in the first place after the referendum. His party is the one in charge of the prosecution for the Catalan political leaders. We cannot in no way sit down and have an alliance with somebody who has done so much harm to our leaders and to our movement. So for me, the clear alliance at the moment is finally a presidential of Esquerra, who is a party that has been for longer than 80 years fighting for independence, who has had presidents killed by Franco, presidents in the exile, and now our current president Junqueras is in prison. So it's a party that has left so much for this movement. And then we have Junts, which is the Puigdemont party. They did a very good campaign. They are coming from this center right to a kind of center left. They are putting interesting policies in their manifesto. So I think an alliance between Junts and Esquerra and CUP would be a very interesting alliance, and it could be the government that finally gets and delivers independence for Catalonia.
One of the standout figures in this story is the fact that for the first time, the pro-independence parties now represent over 50% of the votes. Now, in Scotland, obviously, you will have heard that there have been 21 polls in Scotland which all put support for independence above 50%. Is this a historic day for Catalonia?
Yes, because even though we always had majority in parliament, we never had this amount of votes and this amount of support. These elections come after, as I mentioned prior, that Kim Torra was banned from office. So this election shouldn't even be happening in the first place. Pro-independence parties fiercely campaigned for these elections not to take place in the middle of a pandemic. The Spanish courts, once again, didn't hear to the Catalan people and did whatever they pleased. So yesterday we had an election in the middle of a pandemic, which was interesting. It was a bit frightening, but it was interesting. So yeah, I believe it's now time for changing Catalonia, and this support and this pandemic has shown that central governments don't function. The closer this government is to the people, the better it functions. The evolution works, and it's happened with Holyrood. The way Nicola and the SNP have handled this pandemic has given them a huge support, and I think is going to help us have a majority in Holyrood. And I think it's happened with Catalonia. The fact that you have a parliament for Catalan people, presidented by Catalan people who know and understand the needs of the Catalan people, makes it easier targeting pandemics like this, and it pays back in the elections.
What you were saying about the pro-independence parties not wanting to hold a referendum in the middle of the pandemic, did the Spanish parties, do you think, deliberately decide to have the election during the pandemic in order to try and reduce the turnout?
Yes, because they thought between that, Junts is trying to recreate themselves from losing their leader. And then Esquerra is now in government, and obviously this pandemic, they thought it was going to hurt a lot. And they had a candidate who was, until a few weeks prior to the campaign, the Minister of Health for the Spanish government. Obviously, they thought they were clear winners, and the numbers were giving them clear winners. But you can never be too confident. And when you don't go down to the root of the problem, when you don't sit down and listen to the people are not going to vote for you. And this is what Esquerra did. They were down with the people. They sat, they understood, and they put forward motions and plans that people needed in this moment. And they've seen that the Spanish government has been the problem with the payments for the furlough payments, for the vaccines. It's all been problems that the Spanish government has been causing. Meanwhile, the Catalan parliament, it's been able to solve and kind of like hear their people needs.
Well, with Scotland coming up for its own election in May, Valentina, what lessons do you think the Scottish independence campaigners could learn from the Catalan experience in this last election?
Well, this is something I've said as a pro-independence Scottish activist and as a Catalan activist. You know, we have here something so positive. We have independence that is a route to a new country, is a whole new chapter that we can all be part of. So we have to play more in the positivity of what we bring to Scotland or what we bring to Catalonia. We have to let people know this hasn't worked, the union hasn't worked, the Tories hasn't worked, they've had time to fix it. And meanwhile, we have been delivering every time you've given us the trust. So I think that's what the SNP should focus on in this campaign, or the Yes movement should focus on this campaign. Let's not focus on the attacks from the Unionist Party, because that's the only thing they have. They have lies and attacks. And let's focus on our campaign and the positivity, the diversity, and the unique of this movement. That is just, let's embrace our Scottishness, you know?
Sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was just thinking about the rise of Vox. Has this worried the Catalan people, the fact that the far right has become more prevalent in this election?
Yes, unfortunately, it's not surprising though, because prior to Vox, when I was younger, around the early 2000s and 2010, we had a party called Solidaritat Catalana, who were exactly like you keep, you know, against immigration, racist, misogynist, you know, everything
Yeah.
you shouldn't be, but in a person. And Vox has been delivering that speech that for many people works. Unfortunately, this is the problem when you give a platform to fascism, to fascism. Don't get surprised when it shows up in Parliament. I don't think Vox, with the claims they make, with the things they say, they shouldn't be shared in electoral campaign with other parties. This is a party that threats democracy. You
Yeah.
know, like we shouldn't be giving them any space. And that's the thing. When you give an opportunity to fascism, then it's too late until you have it in your doorstep.
Well, perhaps it's just there for a while, Valentina, but it's heavily outnumbered, of course, by people who don't think that way. Anyway, Valentina, I know that you have to leave us now, but I wanted to thank you for your wonderful comments and giving us a different view of a different independence fight from Catalonia. Sandra,
I would like
you,
to thank you for having me, and well, thank you, Sandra, for all your years of service in Holyrood, and certainly you will be missed, and I hope to see you in the campaign trail soon. Thank you all.
I
thank
will.
you, Valentina.
Well, thank you.
Sandra, I know you haven't had a chance to really comment on anything to do with the Catalan election, but have you any reflections on what Valentina was just saying?
I think Valentina basically hit the nail on the head when she talked about the positivity that we have here in Scotland, a new country, a new world. I think she said a lot of things that, well, most of the things she said, I couldn't disagree. I would absolutely agree with her in that respect. Certainly, you know, Catalonia, I say they've learned a lot from the Scottish experience, but I think we can learn a lot from their experience also. And the one thing that caught me when Valentina was talking about, when we're talking about the Vox party, and you shouldn't give fascism any room or any space, that's basically what happened and led to Brexit, when
Yeah.
people gave Farage the space, and instead of the Conservatives, the Tories and Labour Party turning their backs on that and being true to the values of so enjoyable and basically the positivity that came out of that campaign, we need to capture that again. We shouldn't be downhearted by what's happening within various parties, okay, the SNP, basically, and we shouldn't be downhearted what's happening in the media. We should expect that from the media. And I spoke to the YSI, Young Scottish Independents, Young Nationalists, just last week, and said to them exactly the same thing. Discuss things, you know, talk out your differences, but bear in mind, this media would not be attacking Scotland and the Scottish Government so much if it didn't believe we were on the cusp of independence. And we have to keep that and make sure we reach that for the sake of the younger people, but also the giants who are no longer here, which has passed this baton on to us. Great similarities between Catalonia and Scotland, much socialism. We see things differently, and that's a good thing. So I think there's more that binds us than ever makes us any different from Catalonia. Just a country with different ideas, young country, want a bit of socialism, social justice. You can see it in all the things they're doing,
Yeah.
and you have monster on top that won't allow you to put forward your own ideas, and democracy as well.
Listen, thank you very much for that, Sandra. We're going to move on now, if I may. And this time, we're going to talk about Dominic Cummings and his role in handing COVID contracts to firms run by friends. Dominic Cummings was instrumental in the process of awarding government contract without tender to a company run by his friends, according to court documents that raise concerns about whether the Cabinet Office may have misled the public. The documents reveal the central role the Prime Minister's former chief advisor played in the awarding of a contract to Public First, a research company owned and run by two of his long-standing associates. Public First was paid £564,393 to research the public's understanding of the coronavirus and the government's messaging around the pandemic, and one of its partners was seconded to work in Downing Street. The company is run by James Frayne and Rachel Wolfe, who are both former colleagues of Cummings and the Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove. In 2019, Wolfe co-wrote the Conservative Party's general election manifesto. When The Guardian and Open Democracy first revealed in July last year that Public First had been awarded a contract without tender, the Cabinet Office said in a statement that it was nonsense to suggest that the owner's long associations with Cummings and Gove were a factor in the decision to award it a contract. However, in a witness statement submitted to the High Court on Monday as part of a judicial review of the award, Cummings described himself as the driving decision-maker behind the government's decision to conduct more focus groups and to hire Public First, and said his faith in the company was based on his extensive experience working with its staff. Cummings described Frayne and Wolfe as his friends. Catherine Hunt, the head of Insight and Evaluation at the Cabinet Office and the Prime Minister's Office, described Public First in internal communications as mates of Cummings and of Johnson's then head of communications, Lee Kane, hence getting all our work with no contract. In a witness statement, Hunt said that the email to colleagues was meant as a joke. Jason Koppel, QC, representing the Good Law Project, the not-for-profit campaign group which brought the judicial review, referred to another internal message from Hunt in January, which related to a previous appointment of Public First for work unrelated to the pandemic. In that message, Hunt referred to Public First as Tory Party research agency tests Tory Party narrative on public money. The judge, Mrs. Justice O'Farrell, will determine the judicial review case following a one-day hearing of both sides' arguments. Now, I dare say, Sandra, that this kind of, I think that it's known as a chumocracy, isn't it, is the popular phrase for it, seems to have become widespread in the Tory government and in friends of its cabinet members and advisors.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, I was going to come in when Valentina mentioned about the corruption in Spain amongst elected officials. When she was talking about obviously getting the COVID vaccine. And I was going to remind her that Boris Johnson's father's already had his second one, as have others. But this pinpoints the corruption that is there in Westminster. I mean, it's not just this, contract, you get the PPE, you've got all these other contracts given to friends of the people in the Tory government and the cabinet of the Tory government, not producing anything and giving, well, I wish somebody would count. I know someone has actually counted it up and etc. You're into billions of pounds. Sheer corruption in this government. And the sooner, and I'm glad that you mentioned this tonight, I would love to see perhaps even Broadcasting Scotland or dispatches or some programme actually doing an investigation into the amount of money which has been given to friends of Boris Johnson and others, because it runs into billions and it hasn't produced anything. If this was another country, as they would say, a third world country, or a developing country, they would be talking about a regime change for it. Sheer corruption. And they're getting away with it. Judicial reviews, you can take it there if you like, but the media don't even pick up on all of it. They pick up on some, but not all of it. And I think it's a disgrace, but it's very frightening and very worrying that you have a government there in Westminster, which actually down in England, they're going up in the polls. You've got to ask yourself, what is it all about? What is it all about, and how far are they able to go to, further this corruption and not get held to account?
Well, these are definitely questions that need answers. Sadly, I don't think we may get them from this review. Anyway, I need to move on, Sandra. So our next story, we're looking at following a new report. The SNP has demanded that the Chancellor plug the gaps in support for the millions who have been excluded from available UK government coronavirus schemes. The Treasury Committee's report sets out four key recommendations, all of which the SNP has been calling for since summer last year, and calls on the UK government to look at other models of support, including those developed by the devolved administrations. It recommends that the Treasury use the date of 2019-2020 tax returns to help the newly self-employed who missed out on previous support. It brings forward support for limited company directors to reconsider the 50% limit on eligibility criteria for the fourth tranche of the SEISS grant, so that those who derive less than half their income through self-employment can receive some level of support, and to remove the £50,000 cap on the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, which creates a cliff edge. The Resolution Foundation estimates that 1 in 3 people in self-employment, a total of 1.7 million, are at risk of losing their income, including around 330,000 in Scotland. Alison Thewlis MP, the SNP Shadow Chancellor and the co-chair of the Excluded UK All-Party Parliamentary Group, said that this report vindicates what the SNP has been calling on for months. The Chancellor is failing miserably to follow through on his government's commitment that no one would be left behind. Well, clearly, Sandra, many hundreds of thousands of people have been left behind by the Chancellor's support schemes. How important is it that the government does something about this now? Is it too late, or can something be done to help people who have missed out on the first 2 or even 3 of these payments?
I suppose you'd say it's never too late, but representing the Kelvin constituency, where, basically we have thousands of small businesses which fall into that category or fall into that trap or limbo, as you might say. And the Scottish Government has put forward various schemes. Trying to work your way around these various schemes is pretty difficult as well. But obviously we have produced papers, and I'll speak to Federation of Small Businesses and the small businesses in my constituency to try and work their way around it. And touch wood, we're getting there, but there's still some that fall through the gaps, particularly the ones you mentioned at first, who 2019-2020, which it could even been, I had a case where it was a day late, today, when they'd set up, so they fell through that crack. Lots of them have been using their own savings. I had one today who had basically, I hate to use the word pawn, but they had to pawn stuff to keep themselves going. They should never ever be in that position. There's billions of pounds. We just talk about the corruption there with, contracts going to businessmen and businesswomen who know Boris Johnson and friends. Billions there, wasted, written off. Nobody talks about it. And yet we have these people trying to make a decent living. And at the end of the day, if we in the Scottish Parliament had borrowing powers, we could borrow money and use it the way we want to. What we are doing is using, obviously, consequentials, the Barnett formula, and the monies that we get in the Scottish Government to try and create different schemes to benefit these mostly small businesses, and obviously you said limited companies too, because there's various ways. If you're a sole trader and you become a director in a limited company, because you're a limited company, you're the sole employee, you can't access any, and it's just so complicated and so many things to go around. So absolutely, they're the ones who have the purse strings. If they don't want to do it, give us borrowing powers in the Scottish Parliament, and we could do it, and we could help these people. And the worry I have is you just need to look at the city centre that I represent as well. There's hardly a shop opened, a shop opened. A number with to let signs. I think it'll have a real direct effect on city centres, and I know that we have raised it in Parliament, and I know that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Kate Forbes, has put forward a package to save and regenerate city centres. But is it too late? I don't want to be negative about it, but I think for some companies, yes, it will be too late, and they won't come back from this unless we get the borrowing powers or the Westminster government, gets up to the plate and actually looks at it in the proper way and gives some furlough, some monies to these small traders.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. We're going to move from reality to fantasy now, and a proposed undersea tunnel between Scotland and Northern Ireland has hit some credibility problems, with one senior Conservative MP describing it as a Dr. Dolittle fantasy designed to distract from post-Brexit border check problems. The trains could be pulled by an inexhaustible herd of unicorns overseen by stern officious dodos, tweeted Simon Hoare, the Tory MP who chairs Westminster's Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. A push me pull you could be the senior guard, he said, alluding to the Dr. Dolittle creature with a head at each end of its body. And Puff the Magic Dragon, the inspector. The idea was a fantasy that distracted from efforts to smooth post-Brexit checks between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, says Hoare. Let's concentrate on making the protocol work and put the hallucinogenics down. If the rail industry leaders who proposed tunnelling under the Irish Sea between Stranraer and Larne hoped for enthusiasm, or at least to be taken seriously, they must have been disappointed by these withering responses. Well, although this sounds quite funny, Sandra, it is fairly serious, particularly for the people in Northern Ireland. What was your reaction when you heard Boris Johnson touting the idea of a tunnel under the Irish Sea? I think he initially proposed a bridge a year or two ago, but now we've got a tunnel apparently.
I just wondered what he was on when he mentioned that, but that's my thoughts at that particular time. Obviously, you talk about the bridge, but you've got the Irish Seas. It's not the smoothest of crossings. Those of us who went across on the ferry will know. So that was written off. But talk about a tunnel. Beaufort's Dyke is right in the you know what I mean? Where ammunition is there. I mean, things are dumped, which is another issue. Which
Yeah.
hopefully, because of what Johnson mentioned, this tunnel, then maybe we can educate the Scottish people on the fact that they dump all this stuff at Beaufort's Dyke, in the Irish Sea, and obviously the Irish people. Absolutely, but to say that live ammunition, etc., to say that they're going to dig a tunnel under there is just, as you said, I'll call it pie in the sky, but nothing surprises me about Boris Johnson or this Conservative government. It's as if he goes to bed and comes up with an idea and it sticks in his head, and without even thinking about anything, it just comes out. Because it's absolutely nonsensical to go forward with this so-called tunnel. It won't benefit anybody, and as has already been mentioned, they'll be using our money for that. Whereas personally,
do you think, Sandra, that perhaps the idea behind this is for Boris Johnson to line the pockets of someone else's company to come up with the plans and look at feasibility studies for this?
it could be, but I think it's just a distraction. He thinks it's a great idea. I think it lets you know the mental state of the man and the cabinet that's round about him. He's a distraction. This will keep the Scots and the Irish, obviously the Irish that's over there in Northern Ireland. It'll keep them happy. They'll be looking into that. They won't see what else we're doing on their side. He really believes these things. I can't fathom out. I'm just hoping and praying that we have this independent referendum and we can get away from the madness of Westminster, the madness of Brexit, and the fact that the Tories are up in the polls down in England. It just tells you such an awful lot. It's a no-goer.
Okay, Sandra, thanks very much for that. Now, moving to America now, and Microsoft president said that the SolarWinds hack was the largest and most sophisticated attack ever. A hacking campaign that used a US tech company as a springboard to compromise a raft of United States government agencies is the largest and most sophisticated attack the world has ever seen, Microsoft Corporation President Brad Smith has said. The operation, which was identified in December and that the US government has said was likely orchestrated by Russia, breached software made by SolarWinds Corp, giving hackers access to thousands of companies and government offices which used its products. The hackers got access to emails at the US Treasury, Justice and Commerce departments and other agencies. Cybersecurity experts have said that it could take months to identify the compromised systems and expel the hackers. I think from a software engineering perspective, it's probably fair to say that this is the largest and most sophisticated attack the world has ever seen, Smith said during an interview that aired on Sunday on the CBS program 60 Minutes. The breach could have compromised up to 18,000 SolarWinds customers that used the company's Orion network monitoring software and likely relied on hundreds of engineers. When we analysed everything that we saw at Microsoft, we asked ourselves how many engineers have probably worked on these attacks. And the answer that we came to was, well, certainly more than 1,000, Smith said. US intelligence services said last month that Russia was likely behind the SolarWinds breach, which they said appeared to be aimed at collecting intelligence rather than destructive acts. Russia has denied responsibility for the hacking campaign. Sandra, this is becoming more and more common, isn't it? America appearing to be targeted by hackers, which the Americans allege are backed by Russia. How much credibility do you think this has? Are the Russians really out to try and steal secrets from the Americans in this way?
I suppose it's vice versa. It brings you back to the Cold War, only you didn't have the technology at that particular time. I mean, there's two big players in this. There's America and obviously Russia. But I think we've got to remember China is quite involved as well in the technology part of it. Whether I believe that Russia is trying to, steal secrets, call it, probably. But I would also say probably the same for America trying to steal secrets from Russia. The one thing I think it tells us, and I'm not a technology person, 100%. I can do various bits and pieces, but I could never, ever do that. And it just shows you the cleverest minds, if that's what you want to call people who hack, etc., are out there. And while technology has been absolutely fantastic for us all, it's a dangerous game as well, isn't it? Because whilst most people think about themselves, about people, online banking or whatever it may be, about being hacked, and you get to this other level, it's quite worrying actually. It's a dangerous game, and I think Russia, is capable of doing it, but then America is just as capable of doing it to them too. So I don't know how you police the internet to that extent when you've got these thousands of people who are professionals at it. What chance do we as ordinary punters got of understanding it, never mind stopping it?
All right, well, listen, Sandra, we're going to leave that for the moment and move on to our next story. Nigeria's Okonjo-Iweala makes history as the new head of the World Trade Organization. 3 months after Donald Trump's administration rejected her, former Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala received unanimous backing on Monday to become the first woman and the first African Director General of the World Trade Organization. A self-declared doer with a track record of taking on seemingly intractable problems, Okonjo-Iweala will have her work cut out for her at the trade body, even without Donald Trump and his threat to pull the United States out of the organisation. As Director General, a position that wields limited power, Okonjo-Iweala will also need to be a broker. Will also need to broker international trade talks in the face of persistent US-China conflict, to respond to pressure to reform trade rules and to counter protectionism heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic. In her acceptance speech at the WTO, she said that getting a trade deal at the next major ministerial meeting would be a top priority, and also urged members to reject vaccine nationalism, according to a delegate attending the closed-door meeting. In the same speech, she described the challenges facing the body as numerous and tricky, but not insurmountable. Again, we're seeing many more women moving into places of high power in the world of finance. But this is the first time a woman has been in charge of the WTO, and an African woman at that. This is surely another historic step, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's not before time. You introduced it as a doer, and I think most women are doers, basically. When you go to, I've not been to the World Trade Organisation and sat in a meeting, but I've sat in numerous other, kind of high profile meetings. And I must admit, if I had to listen to one middle aged, usually white man, wittering on for half an hour without getting to the point, and followed by another half a dozen, middle-aged white men wittering on and never getting to the point. I'm ecstatic that we've got a woman who's a doer, who can probably cut through all of the rubbish and get to the point, because we need somebody there, yes, somebody that can lead, but somebody with a sharp brain, and I believe she has one, somebody with a sharp brain who can think quickly, but also bring people together. You'll never be able to bring all of them together, obviously, but America, China, as I'd mentioned before, China's a big part in lots of things that go on in the world. But I think that somebody coming from that background, not necessarily even that she's a woman, she'll be listened to more, I would imagine. She'll be
Would you
listened to
say,
more,
Sandra, would you say
you know.
possibly because she actually doesn't have a horse in the race? She's not an American, she's not a white man, she's not Chinese, she is sitting in the middle. Surely, she's going to have to play the diplomat a little bit as well as the financier.
Well, I think so, and I think she'll have more respect. I say respect, and I hope that they would respect the fact that she's not from one of the superpowers, which is good, because usually the superpowers, as you named and mentioned them, have their own interests at heart, and they won't budge from whatever their idea is, what they want to see for their country. So I think it'll be a whole new ball game, and I do like what she mentioned about the vaccine, because obviously, we're all in this together. Yeah, we want our neighbours, our families to be vaccinated, but you also want to see some of the poorer countries get the opportunity to be vaccinated as well. And from what she says, it seems to me that she would like to do that as well. So I would classify there's a bit of a social conscience there, which
Right.
I think is really good in that respect. So I wish her all the best, and I'm sure she'll do a great job. And the thing that happens, Gordon, though, if you're a woman, you've got to try twice as hard as a man. And that can be quite tiring at times. And if you fail, you get blamed twice as hard as a man as well. So I'm wishing her all the best, and I'm sure she'll be a success.
Let's hope so. Okay, moving to our last story this evening now. And we're coming back to Scotland for this one. A new Scottish child payment starts today, with more than 77,000 Scottish child payment applications having been received since Social Security Scotland started taking applications on the 9th of November. The new benefit, which is unique to Scotland, will give qualifying parents and carers £40 every 4 weeks for each child under 6. The benefit starts today, meaning that Social Security Scotland is now able to do final eligibility checks and start issuing decisions. The first decisions and payments will arrive from later this month. Payments for those who applied today or earlier will be backdated today. Parents and carers have not yet applied and have a child under 6 are encouraged to apply today to get the maximum amount of money they're entitled to. People who apply after today will have their payment calculated from the day that they apply. So here we are, a story of the Scottish Government doing the day job, Sandra, and doing something very useful. I mean, parents have a difficult enough time as it is. This is surely going to be a great help.
I think it's great, and that's one of the things that, I got involved in politics to do with social justice, and I see what's been happening with the Scottish Government, the SNP government. We are looking after the more vulnerable people that can't necessarily look after themselves. And if it was left to Westminster, obviously at the moment, you've got all the benefit cuts, etc., there, so they don't care. And I just think it's great that a Scottish Government who obviously just gets X amount of money, isn't allowed to borrow, is able to do this. It's a lifesaver for people, an absolute lifesaver. And, people forget about folk that are on low wages. They're working. There's a working poor as well, and people hardly ever talk about the working poor. But there's a working poor as well who will benefit from this, basically because they don't have enough money to go over, and they can get the payments, etc., universal credit they've got to apply for. But the working poor is a huge area in this country, not just in Scotland, obviously, but we're doing something about it. You take the likes of that, prescription charges, the baby box, all of the stuff that we are doing to help the most vulnerable, to help our citizens in Scotland. We should be crying. Well, we do shout from the rooftops. I would just put a plea out to the media. Can you not even have a page of what we are doing? A front page of this is good news. Somebody will find something bad about it, I don't know what, basically. But we're working towards helping people. And that's what a good government does. Listen to the people, see how they're being affected by particularly COVID at the moment anyway, and doing something to help them. And that's what it's all about.
It certainly is, Sandra. Well, we always try in Scotland at 7 to give you good news stories. Anyway, on that good news story, we've reached the end of our time for this evening. So I just need to remind you that, of course, we're in the middle of a major crowdfunder for Broadcasting Scotland at the moment. If you'd like to donate, you can do so by going to our website. The details are on your screen now. You can make an individual donation, or you can sign up as a regular supporter for £5 a month, or you can even volunteer. Anyway, that's about it from us here at Scotland at 7. My thanks again to Sandra White, MSP. Thank you, Sandra. And from all of us here at Scotland at 7, very good night to you.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.